Stay away from her, this girl might bite. The security guard's bark cracked through the marble lobby like a whip, freezing the crowd in tailored suits, mid-step faces tight with a mix of alarm and embarrassment. In the middle of the chaos, a blonde girl no older than 6 was curled up on the cold stone floor, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, body trembling, swaying like a stranded sail caught in a silent storm. Her blue eyes blinked rapidly like trapped birds flapping against the glass of a cage, restless and exhausted. They called it a sensory overload, but none of them truly understood what that meant beyond the fact that it made them uncomfortable, afraid, and helpless. Amid that helplessness, Marcus Williams stood still with a mop in his hand, tall frame, frozen for a brief second, as if caught between two worlds, one tied to invisible duties, the other pulled by a calling he could not ignore. At 42, Marcus had been a teacher, a father, and a man who had witnessed meltdowns far more overwhelming than this. What he saw in that child was not just a sensory episode. It was a signal he had learned to recognize without words, guided only by a heart that still remembered a little girl named Zoe. No one gave Marcus permission to step in. The guard blocked his path with a rigid arm, voice firm with command. "You are just the night janitor. Stay out of this." The last employee who got close was fired on the spot. But Marcus did not need permission. He needed a chance. And he found it in the girl's eyes, eyes full of panic and plea, as if waiting for someone who would not run away. Without a word, Marcus returned to his cart, pulled out a small bottle of solution, unscrewed the cap carefully, and sat down on the marble floor, exactly 3 meters away from the girl, far enough to not invade, close enough to be seen. He dipped his fingers into the water, scooped a bit of foam, and blew the first bubble. No one understood what he was doing. Some shook their heads. Others whispered under their breath. But Marcus paid no mind. He focused only on the girl. The second bubble floated upward, catching the light, delicate as a breath. Then came the third, then the fourth, each one like a droplet of quiet medicine seeping into the tension. And then something shifted. The girl stopped rocking. Her eyes followed the bubbles, as if discovering something even more fragile than herself, and therefore worth watching more than her fear. Marcus continued, unhurried, unshowy, as if playing with his own daughter. In that quiet space, he opened a doorway no degree-bearing expert had ever approached. From the glass corridor above, Gabriel Ward watched silently. CEO of Barstone Biotech, one of the city's most powerful women, the kind who had negotiated with governments and forced multinational corporations to fold before her second cup of coffee. But in that moment, watching her daughter calm beneath the drift of bubbles from a black janitor's hands, she forgot how to breathe. It was not a 6-figure therapy. It was not a Swiss specialist. It was a regular man, sweat-dampened uniform, and all seated on marble, performing magic with the one thing the wealthy often forget to value: empathy. Eva, the daughter she had failed to reach for years, was lying still, transfixed by the bubbles like they held secrets she finally had permission to chase. And Gabriel knew this was not coincidence. It was a reckoning. She stepped into the elevator, heels echoing like quiet drum beats across the polished stone. Her eyes never left the man below. Employees straightened their backs at the sight of her, tightened their ties, buried their discomfort. But Marcus did not stand. He remained seated, blowing bubbles, not out of disrespect, but out of unwavering focus on a child in need of healing. That kind of courage did not exist in that building, not even in her. "Mr. Marcus Williams." Gabriel's voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "I need to speak with you." Marcus rose, slowly wiped his hands on his pants. eyes still fixed on Ava, as if making sure she would not return to that storm. She was no longer curled up. She lay on her side, gaze soft, following a single bubble floating above her face. He knew what was coming, maybe a warning, maybe a dismissal, but he had already made peace with it. 20 years as an educator had not taught him how to walk away. They had taught him how to stand accountable even when no one was watching. So he followed the woman who had once ruled an empire but now stood face to face with something money could not bend. Each footstep echoed across the expensive rug, not as the sound of a janitor crossing into unfamiliar ground, but as the quiet shift of something deeper, when someone steps out from the margins, not to challenge, but to remind. Sometimes compassion does not need an invitation. It only needs to show up on time. And in that moment, true power did not sit behind a CEO nameplate. It sat in the hands of the one who dared to kneel at just the right time. The room sat atop the 42nd floor of Barstone Tower, where sunlight spilled through floor to ceiling glass stretching across hardwood and Persian rug, so thick it devoured the sound of footsteps. Marcus entered quietly, like a passing shadow, yet with the calm composure of someone who had nothing to prove. His janitor's uniform still carried faint traces of cleaning water, the fabric damp, in places clinging lightly to his sleeves. His old rubber shoes brushed against the rug with a muffled hush, each step careful, as if he did not wish to disturb a room built for powerful silences. Ahead of him, Gabriel Ward stood behind her wide glass desk, poised like a figure sculpted from 1,000 high-level meetings, her eyes no longer cold, yet not quite softened. Sit. She gestured toward a dark brown leather chair, its price, no doubt, exceeding Marcus's monthly salary. But he did not sit. He remained upright, spine unbent, eyes still, and even neither expectant nor evasive. For the first time, she truly looked at him, not through titles or skin color, but as someone fully present, unshaken by the unspoken hierarchy of the room. Eventually, he took the seat slow and deliberate. "Who taught you that?" she asked, her voice stripped of command, replaced by curiosity, trying to decode a language she had never been taught. "The bubbles. The way you calmed Ava." Marcus held her gaze, his voice low and steady, as though the truth was something too sacred to speak loudly. "I learned it from my daughter. She was diagnosed with autism at 3. I did not learn it from textbooks. I learned it from sleepless nights, from a grandmother who cried in silence because no one could understand what her grandchild needed, and from moments when the only thing that helped her calm down was the reflection of light inside a drifting soap bubble." Gabriel paused, the words reaching someplace deep beneath the steel-wrapped layers of her rational mind. "And where did you acquire those skills? Some weekend course, perhaps?" Her tone carried a trace of unintentional irony. Marcus did not flinch. "I hold a master's in educational psychology, specializing in special education from Columbia University. I taught for 17 years before education funding was slashed, and I could no longer support my family on a teacher's salary." There was no bitterness in his tone. It was a fact simple and inarguable, like sunlight cutting through glass. She froze, not for lack of logic, but because every logic she had built her life upon suddenly felt paper thin against such raw clarity. A brilliant educator, a true specialist, forced to mop floors to survive, and you are cleaning in my building. She spoke as if the words tasted strange in her mouth. Marcus nodded gently. "Because I needed a stable job to pay for my daughter's school, And because some of us people like me cannot stand by and watch a child collapse, even if she is the daughter of someone we have never met. Gabriel slowly lowered herself into her chair, no longer the titan of boardrooms, but a woman who had just lost her footing inside the very fortress she had built. You understand Eva better than anyone I have ever hired. Marcus looked up not with pride, nor with humility. Because I did not come here to fix her. I came here to listen. His words did not land like dialogue. They landed like nails hammered into the towering wall of assumptions. Gabriel looked down at her desk, the same desk where she had signed contracts worth billions, and realized she had never once asked her daughter what she truly needed. I want to hire you as Eva's therapist. She said, her voice regaining a measure of its usual command, as though rebuilding a strategy in real time. $15,000 a month, half-day shifts. You can keep your current job until we sort things out. Marcus smiled faintly, an expression not easily read. It was not about the number. It was about what lay beneath the number. She was not making an offer. She was trying to reclaim the dignity she had accidentally shattered. Are you refusing? Gabriel's brow furrowed. Number? I am refusing the reason behind the offer. You are trying to fold me into your world so you don't have to face the fact that you misjudged me. You looked at me and saw uniform. You did not see the degree. You did not see the knowledge. You did not see my heart tremble when I looked at your daughter and saw my own little girl reflected in her eyes. Gabriel exhaled, not in protest, not in anger. Maybe for the first time in her life, she was learning to sit with being wrong, not in business, but in how she saw people. Then what do you want? Marcus answered without pause. I want to be with Eva. No surveillance, no clock, no weekly reports. I do not want to become the 44th expert in her life. I want to be the first person to see her as a child, not a diagnosis, not a case, not a medical failure disguised with money. Gabriel stared at him for a long time, as though for the first time in her life she was speaking to someone not defined by titles or credentials, but by lived experience and unwavering clarity. Marcus stood, looked at her one last time, and turned to leave. And if the next time someone helps your daughter while others stand frozen, ask them one question first. What have they lived through? Before you judge whether they are qualified. As the door closed behind him, Gabriel remained in her chair, no longer surrounded by echoes of authority, but by the faint whisper of her own conscience, asking for the very first time, have I truly seen anyone at all? Someone like Gabriel Ward was not used to hearing no. In her world, every answer was crafted to fit her expectations, always packaged in obedient smiles and clear signatures. But that man, with his worn-out shoes and quiet eyes, did not allow her to repeat her pattern. She had made a generous offer, a fee that any specialist would have accepted without hesitation. But that man, with a composure colder than steel, turned her down, not because of the money, but because of something she had never thought needed reflection, the motive behind her kindness. Marcus did not want to be hired as a way to ease her conscience. He did not show up to compensate for what was missing in Eva's therapy. He simply did what his heart told him. And that was why what he asked for made Gabriel hesitate. No contract, no supervision, no control. All he asked for was time. An idea too vague for someone who had spent her life measuring everything by performance indicators, progress reports, and quarterly outcomes. But the way Marcus spoke those two words made her realize she had never truly understood what they meant. Time was not something to be measured, but something to be felt. Not a straight line with a beginning and end, but a space where connection was allowed to happen. She sat still in her vast office. The expensive leather chair had never made her feel as alone as it did at that moment. For a rare second, she laid her power on the table, exhaled softly, and admitted she had nothing left to bargain with. That man did not want to become a number in her system, nor a witness to her redemption dressed in moral superiority. He wanted Ava to be seen with eyes free of prejudice, not forced into progress, not suffocated by performance charts. Gabriel had heard all kinds of theories from psychologists trained at prestigious universities. They came to Eva armed with toolkits full of terminology and complicated checklists. They spoke of exposure therapy, behavioral analysis, emotional response, and intervention results after 6 weeks. But they never entered her daughter's world. They built fences of knowledge between themselves and the child, believing emotions could be managed through conditional logic. Marcus brought no fences, no toolkit. He brought scars lived through with his own daughter, long nights no theory could soothe, fears no research could quiet, love no textbook could name. 3 days later, on a quiet Saturday morning without meetings charts or alarms, Marcus knocked on the penthouse door of Gabriel's apartment. Walking beside him was a 16-year-old girl with long curly hair and eyes as calm as an evening sea. Zoe entered with no teenage awkwardness, only carrying a worn-out backpack, a few watercolor boxes, and a warm smile gentle enough to lower the tension hanging in the air. Gabriel looked at the girl, then at Marcus, trying to find an explanation for her presence. "She's my daughter," Marcus said softly. "She used to be Eva, just a few years older. I thought maybe Eva needs a friend now, not another specialist." Gabriel was ready to object, but Zoe's gaze stopped her. There was no pride in it, no calculation, only pure willingness. The girl greeted her politely and clearly. "I came to play with Eva, not to fix her." The door opened. Eva was still in her usual corner, sheltering herself like a thin leaf, avoiding the wind. But this time when Zoe walked in, she did not turn away. Zoe sat a few steps away, pulled out paper and paint, and began coloring without saying a word. No questions, no approach, no probing, just painting. A blue sky stretching wide, a sweep of golden light, then swirling red lines like a winding stream. She spoke gently, barely audible, saying the blue was the sky embracing the earth, red was the dream of fire, yellow the smile of sunshine. She did not expect a response. She did not need one. But after a while, when Zoe mixed red and yellow together, Eva softly whispered a word, "Orange." Gabriel froze at the doorway, not because of the word, but the way it was spoken. Soft, unforced, free. Eva had not been called, had not been pressured, had not been modeled into anything. She spoke because she felt safe enough to do so. And the one who made that happen was a teenage girl with no degrees, no credentials, and no need for complex psychological language. Only a heart that could observe and an imagination that could travel far. For the next 2 hours, Eva kept painting. Every color was a sentence, every stroke a release from the silent shell the experts had failed to crack. Marcus sat quietly, not taking notes, not evaluating. But every movement of Eva and Zoe was etched into his mind like someone who had once lived in that world. A world where progress could not be measured yet was worth preserving with every ounce of faith and patience. Gabriel stood behind them, her hands trembling slightly. She did not know what she was witnessing. A miracle, a new technique, or simply a reminder that among all the formulas she had believed in, there was something she had forgotten. Human emotion does not follow models, and sometimes the best therapy is presence without the need to fix. When Eva set down her finished painting, Zoe smiled. "Do you want to name it?" Eva tilted her head, thought for a second, then whispered, "Second Orange." And in that moment, Gabriel understood that what she needed was not more control, but the courage to let go. Not to lose, but to give Eva the chance to exist in her own way. And that no one else but Marcus had shown her with a refusal that forced her to relearn acceptance. It started on a quiet morning, sunlight pouring into the penthouse in soft gold, like a butterfly brushing against the window pane. Zoe became part of Eva's silent orbit without needing any introductions or grand gestures. The 16-year-old girl stepped into the world of an 8-year-old like she had always belonged there. No degrees, no titles, but every step Zoe took carried something most well-educated specialists had long forgotten: the instinct to listen to silence. Eva didn't look at Zoe in the beginning, but she didn't turn away either. Zoe's presence didn't create noise, didn't disturb the fragile peace of the room. She sat quietly on the wooden floor by the window, pulled out a worn-out sketchbook and a tin of old watercolors from her backpack, and started mixing colors. She didn't ask Eva to join her, didn't coax or create a gap. Zoe painted as if she was talking to herself through waves of color, then softly told little stories about each hue. Blue was the sky hugging the earth. Red was a heart right before it cries. Yellow was the sun's last smile before it disappears. These words didn't try to teach anything, they drifted through the air like a breeze. And slowly, Eva reached for the paints. Once, then again. A few moments later, her tiny hands held a brush, painting without guidance, without asking permission. Gabriel stood behind the door frame, her hand gripping the wooden pillar as if she needed something to hold on to when facing something she had never seen before. No therapist had ever brought Eva out this quickly. The girl had gone through dozens of trials, hours of assessments, thousands of dollars spent on treatments. Yet within 30 minutes, a stranger named Zoe had done what experts had failed to achieve over 4 years. Marcus sat across the room, his eyes focused yet never intruding. He let it all unfold naturally. He had seen this before in Zoe's early years after her diagnosis, when she clung to watercolors like an escape from the crashing noise and light. But this time, she was the guide. She had learned how to befriend the silence, and now she was offering that secret to Eva. No instructions were given, no fingers pointed, but a language began to form, wordless but clear. Eva's hand moved over the page, soft curves, taking shape colors, blending into forms without names. When Zoe asked what she wanted to name her first painting, Eva whispered a word: orange. Zoe didn't laugh, didn't act surprised. She just nodded and said, as if they had talked about it many times before, "That's right. Orange is when red and yellow decide to stop fighting." It wasn't a cinematic moment. No background music, no glowing lights. Just two girls sitting together, one painting the other, whispering. But in Gabriel's eyes, it was a scene that tilted her whole world. She began to realize that all the methods she had ever chosen were rooted in fear. Fear of being seen as helpless. Fear of her daughter being a burden. Fear of losing control over what lay ahead. But Zoe and Marcus didn't bring fear with them. They brought time, patience, and the belief that people weren't meant to be fixed, only understood. When the hour ended, Zoe packed her paints, wiped her hands, and told Eva she would come back. Eva said nothing, but her eyes followed Zoe to the door. Gabriel stepped out, locking eyes with Marcus's daughter. She didn't know what to say, because in just 1 hour, that girl had done more than every expert consultation combined. That girl, born in a small apartment in the south end of the city, had entered this house with no business card, no credentials, but left behind a path no one else could find. The next day, Zoe returned, this time with an old radio. She played instrumental songs, letting the soft melodies float through the room like waves touching the shore. Eva wasn't startled. She began to sway slightly with the rhythm. No one taught Zoe to do this. She just remembered when she was the one who needed someone to understand her without saying a word. Marcus stood back, a faint smile in his eyes. He knew the connection had been made not through technique, but through lived experience, through old wounds that had healed into maps for other lost children. Gabriel called Marcus that evening. Her voice was no longer cold. It carried a strange tone of someone learning how to soften. "That girl Zoe is special," Marcus answered with one line. "She is special because she once needed someone, and now she's become the one she once needed." Gabriel went quiet for a long time. She understood now. Sometimes to help your child heal, you have to let someone else step in and do what you're too close to do yourself. From that day on, Zoe came to visit Eva every weekend. No therapy sessions, no intervention plans, just two girls, painting, telling stories, listening to music, and sometimes just sitting quietly side by side. But what Gabriel began to notice was this: every time Zoe left, Eva stayed calm longer. And then one afternoon, as Zoe stood up to leave, Eva said 4 words: "Come back tomorrow too." Gabriel lost a breath, not because her daughter was making progress, but because for the first time she didn't have to force it. It came from trust. It came from Eva's own choice. And the person who gave her daughter back her voice wasn't the best doctor in town, but a teenage girl who had once weathered her own storm to become a lighthouse for someone else. In a world where qualifications are often measured by paper, some things only exist when we're willing to sit still, listen, and let a child speak in their own language. And somehow Zoe had always known how to do just that without ever being taught. The doorbell rang precisely at 2 p.m., so punctual, it made Gabriel realize she had forgotten the most important appointment of the week. She rushed out of her office, adjusted her collar, her face unconsciously tightening the way it always did when preparing to meet someone she once believed to be irreplaceable. Dr. Harrison Penton stood at the door in a tailored 3-piece suit, cobalt blue tie, and the posture of a man hardened by decades of working with the elite. He did not nod at Marcus or Zoe, who were seated quietly in the corner of the living room. He did not ask about Ava. He walked straight in as though everything in this house fell under his professional jurisdiction. "Shall we begin the session?" he said evenly, his eyes brushing past Zoe like she was part of the furniture. But he stopped mid-step when he saw Eva sitting next to Zoe, holding a crayon, her head tilted slightly, as she focused on blending pale purple from blue and pink. No signs of anxiety, no sudden reactions, just two girls creating together, breathing in a shared world where diagnoses held no power. "Who allowed them in here?" Penton asked, voice lowered but laced with restrained fury. Gabriel stepped forward slowly, eyes unflinching. "Marcus and Zoe are supporting Eva," she said. The word supporting made Penton laugh dryly, a sound as sharp as a slap in the warm atmosphere that had taken weeks to build. Supporting her with what? Childish sketches and meaningless color games. Gabriel had not yet responded when Marcus stood up and calmly approached the space between the two men, held as precisely as the distance between theory and reality. Dr. Penton, I read your article in Pediatrics Quarterly on positive behavior analysis. Marcus said in a steady tone, his gaze unwavering. I noticed similarities with the PECS method I used over a decade ago. You are very skilled at repeating terminology, but it seems you've forgotten that a child is never an equation. And you are exactly what Penton snapped back, losing the composure that usually cloaked him. A janitor who thinks he understands psychology because he once taught in public school. Marcus looked straight into his eyes, not flinching even for a moment. I have a master's degree in educational psychology from Columbia. 17 years working with children on the spectrum. I do not think I know. I have lived inside it. I have raised a child through it. I do not publish articles. I sit beside children, use real time and real feelings to hear what they have not yet found words to say. The room fell silent. Eva turned to look at Marcus, then at Penton, her eyes showing clear worry at the shift in energy. Zoe gently touched her shoulder, signaling her to keep drawing, as if reminding her that noise always fades if we keep doing what brings us peace. Gabriel observed it all, sensing each subtle shift in her daughter, from tension to calm, from confusion to trust. And she began to understand that true power did not lie in degrees or prestige, but in the ability to make a child feel safe. Penton turned to Gabriel, his face clouded with disappointment. I cannot continue if you allow unqualified individuals to interfere with treatment. This is not just unprofessional, it is a threat to the patient's mental health. Each word landed like a hammer, trying to nail down an order he believed was his to uphold. Gabriel looked at him for a long moment, her eyes no longer uncertain, but rebuilt with a new understanding. I will reconsider our session, she said. Perhaps we need a different approach. Penton stepped back, regaining some of his formal tone, but his eyes had lost their confidence. If you choose to let amateurs lead your daughter's progress, I will not be responsible for the collapse that follows. When he turned to leave, the door closed without a slam, but the silence it left behind lingered. Zoe kept drawing. Eva began to smile. And Gabriel sat down for the first time in years, not out of duty, not out of maternal obligation, but simply to observe her daughter through bare eyes stripped of defense. Marcus came over and handed her a handwritten notebook, its pages worn ink slightly faded at the edges. These are the notes I took over the past 4 weeks. While observing Eva, he said, not for you to assess, but for you to understand your daughter better. It is not a report. There are no charts. Just stories from the eyes of someone who spent hours beside another little girl, listening to how her breath shifted each time purple appeared. There were no academic terms, only lines any mother could understand if she paused long enough. And she realized Marcus had not challenged Penton with anger. He did it with the quiet resolve of someone who had been underestimated, silenced, yet never lost faith in what he believed. And now, with that same calm, he was helping her stop listening to the voice of authority and start hearing the quiet pull of a mother's instinct. That afternoon, when Zoe and Marcus left, Eva stepped to the door on her own to see them off. She said nothing, but her gaze lingered long enough for Zoe to lean down and whisper, I will come back tomorrow. We can paint the third shade of orange. Eva nodded, and Gabriel stood behind them, watching the entire scene like someone waking from a long, disorienting dream. All those years she thought she had to fight the world to protect her daughter, yet never realized she had to lower her weapons to let her child simply be. And the man she once saw as a stranger had become the only person who knew how to untie each knot without breaking the thread. The 43rd floor conference room of Barstone Biotech had seen million-dollar deals sealed with cold handshakes and unblinking eyes. That day, the room still smelled of expensive coffee and freshly printed documents, the air thick with reverence for intellect and power. But something had changed. No one expected that the emergency meeting called by Dr. Penton, who had long assumed absolute control over all therapeutic matters, would become the breaking point that cracked the carefully built hierarchy from within. Gabriel entered first, her face calm in a way that seemed unusual, her laptop already open, and for the first time, no stack of reports in her hand. She took her usual seat at the head of the table, needing no introduction to reaffirm her authority. Around her were doctors, consultants, and specialists, each displaying various shades of curiosity and caution. Dr. Penton sat directly across from her, no longer arrogant, but wary. Beside him was Dr. Miranda Foster, a renowned pediatric neurologist celebrated as the future voice of autism therapy. They were there not to protect children, but to protect the walls of power they had quietly built over the years. Let me be clear. Penton began, his eyes scanning for allies. If we continue allowing an unlicensed individual to interact with a patient, especially someone as sensitive as Eva, the legal liabilities will be enormous. Foster nodded, her voice sharp as a blade. It is a breach of protocol and a threat to the credibility of this entire institution. We are talking about someone who used to mop floors. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Though most said nothing, their eyes betrayed a habitual agreement with such rhetoric. Then the door opened. Marcus stepped in. Not in uniform, not in a tailored suit. A modest blazer, a slim leather briefcase, and eyes that didn't waver. Behind him came a woman with graying hair, sharp eyes, and a poised stance. She introduced herself simply without flourish. I am Dr. Sarah Chen, editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Pediatric Intervention. I was invited here because we recently received some very compelling materials from Mr. Marcus Williams. Tension rippled through the room. Penton shifted in his seat, his composure beginning to fray. Marcus opened his briefcase and placed a stack of neatly marked documents on the table. Over the past 4 years, working night shifts in this very building, I happened to come across a number of files, recordings, and patterns. At first, I didn't think much of them. But when I started noticing a recurring flaw in the system, I began documenting it. He laid out Eva's therapy reports, written by Dr. Penton, each spaced weeks apart, but nearly identical in content, only the dates differed. A heavier silence descended. Foster pressed her lips together. Penton breathed heavily, as if holding back a rebuttal he hadn't yet formed. Dr. Chen spoke next, her voice light but piercing. This is therapeutic fraud. A report that merely changes the date while repeating content verbatim is unacceptable under any circumstance. And if this documentation is accurate, we are facing serious clinical malpractice, Marcus continued. He presented a second folder this time containing audio recordings from the building's cleaning system. In the recordings, Foster could be heard discussing ways to extend therapy plans for wealthy families. In one clip, she blatantly stated that maintaining dependency was the best way to secure ongoing revenue without needing real results. Foster went pale. She jumped to her feet, threatening to sue everyone in the room for violating her privacy. But Dr. Chen cut her off crisp and firm. These materials have been verified by 3 independent sources. This morning, the state's Medical Ethics Board opened a formal investigation. You no longer have the right to decline accountability. Penton also rose veins tight in his neck. This is a circus. You choose to believe a janitor over someone with 3 doctorates, but no one responded. Because the man they once overlooked had become the undeniable center of a truth that could no longer be ignored. Marcus turned to Gabriel and handed her a final folder. These are testimonies I've collected from other families whose children received treatment here. 17 cases, all showing extended therapy plans with no justification. Many families had to mortgage their homes to keep paying for sessions that delivered no real progress. They deserve to know the truth. Gabriel clenched her hands. What she once believed was a system designed for the welfare of children was in fact a machine powered by fear and greed. Penton stormed out, but Marcus's voice followed him firm and steady. Ava does not need someone telling her who she must become. She needs someone patient enough to wait until she is ready to unfold. And for the past 2 years, no one in this room has done that except a teenage girl and a father who was once deemed unfit to enter this very boardroom. The room remained silent as Marcus and Dr. Chen left. But the echo they left behind could not be silenced. It crept through the cracks of what once appeared unshakable, forcing everyone still seated to confront an uncomfortable question. Were they truly healing, or had they built a market upon the fragility of children and the desperation of parents? And if a janitor could see that from the shadows of a midnight shift, then those in the light could no longer pretend they were blind. There was no media coverage of the internal meeting at Barstone Biotech, no headlines, no press conferences. But what happened behind those cold glass walls quietly set off a ripple, slowly spreading beyond places that had never been questioned before. Within 30 days, Dr. Penton and Dr. Foster had their medical licenses temporarily suspended for investigation. 17 families Marcus mentioned during the meeting officially filed lawsuits. Many of them struggled to believe what they were hearing at first, that someone who used to clean the hallways had seen something dozens of doctors had overlooked for years. But then they sat with him, read his handwritten notes in a language so simple it startled them, and they understood. Trust does not come from credentials. It comes from someone who knows how to ask the right question at the right time. Gabriel never returned to the 42nd floor office after that day. She resigned as chairwoman in a letter just 3 lines long, no explanation, no justification. She did not need the public to know why. For the first time in her career, she felt that silence was the most powerful thing she could say. Using her own capital once used for acquisitions, she and Marcus founded a new organization with no commercial label and no financial ties. Just 2 short words. Eva. It was not only the name of her daughter, it was a symbol for a way of living an educational philosophy, shaped not by data reports, but by human presence. The first program launched at a public elementary school in the Bronx, where most students came from immigrant and minority communities. Marcus did not bring slides or glossy charts. He brought a box of soap bubbles, some watercolor sets, and a small chalkboard with one simple message written in white chalk. Listen first, theory later. On the first day, teachers looked at him with doubt. By the 3rd day, they started taking notes. By the end of the first week, 3 children who had remained silent for months finally spoke to someone. Zoe joined the program in a whole new role. No longer just the girl who played with Eva, she now became a peer mentor. She did not share theory. She shared her own story. She never stood at a podium or used a microphone. She simply sat in a circle with the younger kids and spoke about the long days when she could not explain why she was sad and how she found her way out through colors and silence. Her story touched something many adults had never noticed. She spoke of loneliness without sound, of being looked at like a problem to be solved, and of the belief that you do not need fixing to be worthy. Within 6 months, Marcus's bubble method was recognized by independent education groups as a highly effective therapeutic approach in non-coercive settings. 17 schools in other states sent invitations to test the EVA program. Experts began to rewrite how they viewed the role of the observer. No longer someone above the classroom, but someone willing to sit down on the floor at the same height as the child, not looking down, not looking through, but looking alongside. The media took notice when Columbia University released a study showing that combining visual elements with emotional reflection in natural spaces increased connection in autistic children by over 35% compared to traditional behavioral therapy. What stood out was that most of the data came from the EVA program led by people without medical degrees. They called it the Marcus effect. When a simple act like blowing a bubble could loosen a mental knot in a child. Gabriel turned down all interview requests. She was no longer a corporate figure. She was a mother starting over not to save her daughter, but to make peace with a trust she once placed in the wrong hands. She spent most of her time in the field joining Marcus at school, sitting quietly behind glass windows, watching every glance and every tilt of a child's head as they realized someone was listening without judgment. As for Eva, she no longer curled up in corners. After 8 months of painting regularly with Zoe, she began speaking in full sentences. Each painting she made was named after a feeling she had just learned to name. One was called Getting to Know the Noise. Another was titled The Sadness with No Strings. Her first painting was exhibited in the New York Children's Art Showcase, not because of technique, but for its perspective. Art experts called it an honest stream of an untouched mind. But for Marcus, it was simply the first time Eva revealed her quiet belief that she could be understood without saying too much. The first annual report of the EVA program had no graphs, no charts, no achievements. Just a thin photo book of children smiling, holding hands, painting, playing in spaces free of pressure. On the last page was a handwritten note by Zoe. People are not meant to be molded into someone else's design. We just need someone patient enough to sit with us until we are ready to come out. Marcus never changed his ways. He still sat beside every child for hours, notebook left closed, just observing. He asked no early questions, made no early moves, because he knew the deepest thing a child needs is not explanation, but patient presence. And sometimes to change a system, you do not need a grand call to action. You just need someone willing to sit down, blow the first bubble, and wait. 1 year after that life-changing meeting at Barstone Biotech, Marcus stepped onto the main stage of the National Conference on Special Education. He was no longer the quiet man with worn rubber shoes, but now stood at the center of attention before more than 3,000 eyes, including experts, researchers, parents, and policymakers. Yet he did not stand there like a victor. He walked out as if passing through a familiar hallway, eyes, humble hands folded together in a gesture so modest it felt like a whisper. Beside him stood Eva, now 10 years old, holding a pink microphone she had picked out 3 weeks earlier, ready for a moment no one thought would ever come. "My name is Eva," she said clearly and slowly, without hesitation. And this is my father, Marcus. He taught me that being different does not mean being broken. The applause began with one clap, then grew like a wave. Not because people were simply moved, but because they felt they were witnessing something real, something rare in a world crowded with hollow jargon and inflated achievements. In the front row sat Gabriel Eyes Red, no longer the executive who once led a biotech empire, but a mother who had to relearn how to look at her child without needing to fix her. No one knew how much she had given up to witness this moment, and she never needed anyone to know. After Eva spoke, Marcus stepped to the microphone with no need for notes. He brought no slides, cited no latest academic studies. He spoke of the children he had met, name by name, story by story, sketch by sketch, fear by unseen fear. He talked about what it felt like when a child who refused to speak placed a colored pencil in his hand, as if extending an invitation. He did not emphasize the effectiveness of the bubble method. He spoke about why such a small gesture could be powerful enough to open a door into a world most thought was sealed shut. And he ended with something no curriculum ever taught: that every child carries a unique code, and sometimes to read that code, we do not need more tools, we just need less judgment. After the event, the Williams method was recognized by 43 universities as part of their curriculum, not as a new model, but as a reminder of what the old models had left behind. Ava began painting and co-hosting workshops with Zoe. One had once been a patient denied proper treatment. The other was the daughter of a man deemed unqualified. Now they became the most beloved young speakers at educational events. They did not talk about data. They spoke about days spent in misunderstanding and the small, quiet moments that opened new paths for the soul. Gabriel left the pharmaceutical industry entirely. She used her personal funds to open 16 support centers for neurodiverse children across the country. Each center was named after a child once labeled a failure, as a way to rewrite the definition of success. She did not manage the centers. She only visited on holidays, walked through classrooms, sat with the children, and many times cried when a simple sentence was spoken by a child once thought incapable of speech. Marcus never referred to her by title. He simply called her Eva's mother. And that more than any position or accolade made Gabriel feel truly accepted. Zoe, now 17, was offered honorary scholarships by 3 top universities, but she chose to defer for a year to travel across states leading art-based connection programs for autistic children. She never saw herself as a role model. She described herself as a translator of emotional language, turning silence into images, glances into brushstrokes. In every session, she left behind a message that became a guiding principle. If I do not speak, do not assume I have nothing to say. I am just using a language no one has learned to listen to yet. Marcus kept his very first janitor uniform. It hung in his new office next to the first photo he ever took with Eva, in which she was blowing bubbles. Beneath it was a small wooden plaque engraved by hand. This is the uniform I was judged for. And it is the same one that made people finally listen to me. He never called himself a reformer. He said every revolution begins by refusing to stay silent when something feels wrong. And if someone who was only ever seen as a janitor could change the system, then no one has an excuse to keep turning a blind eye to injustice. The Wall Street Journal once wrote about Gabriel with the headline, "She learned to lead from her knees." Not because she bowed, but because she learned to lower herself to reach where her daughter stood. The New York Times called Marcus the man who cleaned the system with compassion. But Marcus did not keep those articles. He only held on to one handwritten letter from a father in Texas whose autistic son had been suspended from school. After applying the bubble method and using picture-based conversations, the boy spoke 3 words for the first time in his life. I love you. On the final night of that year, Marcus sat on the steps of the Eva Foundation Center. Zoe was organizing her materials for the next day's workshop, while Eva colored quietly under the warm yellow light. Gabriel walked over with 2 cups of hot tea. She did not ask about new plans or budgets. She simply whispered, "Thank you for turning down that job years ago. Because if you had taken it, none of this would have happened." Marcus smiled gently, eyes resting on the 2 young girls where the future no longer needed permission to exist. He did not become an expert. He did not become a CEO. He did not become a public figure. He simply became the person he once needed. And by doing that, he changed the world. Not with power, but with the belief that everyone deserves to be seen with eyes that do not judge.